She does it now once in the summer.
Okay, Bill? Everyone? Hi, guys. Let's silence our cell phones. I always wanted to say that to a large group. So for those of you who are regulars to this event, Ira needs no introduction. For the newcomers, you should know that my friend here is an internationally respected teacher of non-duality and the Indian philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. He's also studied for many, many, many years with the greatest spiritual minds in India, some of whom started out as teachers and ended up being pupils of Ira. He's an expert on something most of us don't think much about: the origin of, the nature of, the quality of, the duration of our consciousness, and how it shapes our everyday human experience. And so tonight, we're honored to get a little glimpse of that topic from a mind that has devoted itself to it. All yours, Ira.
Thank you, Paul. So, today, I've been coming here yearly for I don't know how many years now, but it's quite, I don't know if it's a decade yet, or 6 or 7 years. And I've given a number of talks. One talk was called Non-Duality and the Nature of the Self. Another was called The 5 Fundamentals of Vedanta. And I presented it as a scholar of Advaita Vedanta, which, if you don't know it, this is the most ancient of Indian philosophical schools of thought. Nothing predates it as a consistent philosophy. And that's about 700 BC. It stems from there. It's still current today, of course, in India. This philosophy is quite still alive and well and being taught and studied, etc. I thought tonight I would share with you some new ideas that I've, in the last couple of years, kind of been working on. And because whoever showed up here probably has some interest in non-duality, spirituality, curiosity about the subject. So what I thought I would do was, rather than come here as a scholar of a subject and share that with you, although I hope to do that, I thought I would share a little bit about myself more. Not in any way to promote myself, I have no interest in that, but to give you a context in which you can understand my spiritual journey. To whatever extent you can relate to it, there'll be some universal parts to it that I think everybody can relate to. And then to show how this led me to non-duality and Advaita Vedanta, and why I personally was drawn to it, what I thought about it, what I taught and wrote about it, why I studied Sanskrit and wanted to know the language that this philosophy was written in. And then to kind of tell you, in the last couple of years, some new ideas have come up that I'll share with you. You can reject these ideas, or you can think about them, or you may find them interesting if you haven't thought about them before. So, let me see if I can begin. When I was about 11 or 12 years old, I I'm assuming like many of you, maybe not, some of you, I rejected all theology. The idea of a God in the sky watching me, the idea that I'll be punished, that there was something that was going to go to heaven, and all of this, by the time 12, 13 years old, I pretty much rejected this. I came to find out, as I was getting older in my teens, that my father was a card-carrying atheist. American Atheist Society had the card, and he would go to meetings of the American Atheist Society in Manhattan. We lived in Queens, and I would accompany him. And I was totally in sync with my father, that there's nothing spiritual, no spirits, no afterlife, no God, no soul, and that religion, for the most part, the world would be better off without it. And that was pretty much my situation and my conviction. Okay. At about the age of, I would say, late 17, somewhere approaching the 18th mark, middle of 17, the zeitgeist of the time, this is about 1964, I'm guessing, 1965, there were people around, you may have heard of them, Timothy Leary, Richard Albert, Alan Watts, Aldous Huxley. The zeitgeist of the time was that people were taking psychedelics and reporting spiritual experiences or something with transcendental, something different than our ordinary experience. And of course, I did get interested in that. And so I too started experimenting with psychedelics. Quite extensively in terms of the number of experiments with psychedelics. I was taking lots and lots of these, every kind I can get my hands on. This included psilocybin and peyote and LSD and DMT and you name it, STP, anything that was available in the day. And let me mention some current theme. On almost all the trips, on many of those trips, experiences, when I took the psychedelic, certain experiences were happening to me. Let me just briefly. I'd have an experience that all of this is kind of like a trip. It's just a trip. I wasn't sure what that means, but it's all a trip. So that was one thing. The other experience I would have commonly was that everything is perfect, exactly as it is. It's all perfect. In a way that I couldn't quite explain when I would come off of the drug. But under the influence, I would realize the perfection of everything at all times. And it seemed so obvious to me. I would often write myself little notes. Ira, please believe me. Everything is perfect. You're going to forget this. But even if you forget it, it's perfect. What were some others? One common experience was that in some sense time was an illusion. Time, when you're under the psychedelic experience and you look at your watch, it doesn't make any sense. It's meaningless. So you kind of feel like time is an illusion. And there's another experience where you kind of feel like your individuality, your ego, somehow dissolves, and there's a feeling of like oneness, an oceanic feeling that you're one with everything. This ego that was separate from the world somehow dissolves, and you feel a feeling of oneness. So these were some common psychedelic experiences I was having. And at the time, in the 60s, there was many books that were coming out that were coming either from an Eastern perspective or from people that were writing and having similar experiences to I had. So I was reading all this literature, and a lot of it came from the East. And that literature from the East, independent of psychedelics, Zen teachers, Hindu teachers, Buddhist teachers, these people were saying that, in fact, time may not be as real as we think, that in a certain way things are perfect, that in a certain sense our life is kind of like a dream. It's like a trip. They didn't say trip, they said a dream. Get it close enough for me. So I became interested in these ideas, and that consciousness was not exactly what our normal everyday consciousness was. I became aware that there's other states of consciousness, and where all of a sudden reality seems so different, and that why should I be prejudiced to only this type of consciousness, where something that could fit on the head of a needle that we had receptors for in our brains could give us such a different perspective. And I became curious, which is the correct perspective? Is there any validity to those experiences? And there were people who were not taking psychedelics who were claiming the same thing. So I wanted to, there was one other problem. I kept coming down from the experience. I kept losing it. And I felt that this is so unbelievably sublime, profound, liberating. And I kept coming down, and in order to get that experience again, I have to take another psychedelic. And I felt that this is, at some point, I'm not going anywhere with this. I wanted to be able to have that experience and not lose it. I wanted to get it and not let it slip. So I was reading at that time, this is probably 1967 or so, some books came out. One book was by an Indian saint by the name of Ramana Maharshi. Has anybody ever heard of Ramana Maharshi? So he's quite a well-known South Indian person. And when I read his biography, it claimed that he realized what I was realizing under psychedelics, that life is like a dream, that time is not real, that everything is perfect. And he realized this, and the literature said, when after he realized it, he didn't lose it. He never lost it. And I thought, how is it that this guy got it and he didn't lose it? Because that's what I'm into. So with that in mind, I got a one-way ticket to Luxembourg and I hitchhiked to India with his book in my backpack. He had died already, but I somehow felt there must be somebody over there that's like him that can tell me how to get it and not lose it. This was the quest. So when I got to India, I finally wound up in New Delhi, and I saw some Westerners, and there seemed to be so many other Westerners like me who had taken psychedelics and wanted to somehow find the truth of that experience in the East, especially India or other Buddhist countries that were teaching some type of, that had something to do that seemed like related to, the idea that the self is an illusion, that my ego is not really a solid, real thing, that was common. And so when we read the Buddhist text that the self is an illusion, that rang true. And so we could pursue that. Or many other examples of everything is perfect, or what we think is real in a certain sense is not as real as we think it is. And so in order to understand this, I got to Delhi and I said, where's all the gurus? They said, you have to go to a place in the Himalayas called Rishikesh. Okay. Rishikesh is a place where the Ganga River comes out of the Himalayas and it's filled with ashrams, and there are people there that are also pursuing this goal of how to be free, how to end suffering. Is there a way in this world? Is there a way to become immortal? Immortal bliss was bandied about there, and these people were all in hot pursuit of this thing. So when I got there, I was looking for someone like this guy Ramana Maharshi. The rest of where I went and what I found is not really that relevant, but the point is that I came across this teaching of non-duality called Vedanta. And let me just share with you why this appealed to me so much. Vedanta is not religion. There's no theological dogma that you must accept and live and die with that faith that you're going to go to heaven or something. That Vedanta was a teaching that is based on universal experience. That everybody, not only yogis and monks, but everybody, if they were willing to examine their experience, they themselves could discover, not imagine, a fact about experience that they've overlooked. So let me see if I can share exactly what that is and why it hit me like a rock, which was this fact, that my experience is that I'm conscious. I have no doubt about that. Most people here probably feel the same way. And that I am a conscious subject, and I'm aware of the world, which is the object of my consciousness, my subjectivity. Through my senses, I'm aware of the outside, and that the world was an object. I'm the conscious subject. And this is my common experience. So the teaching was to ask ourselves, yes, you're a conscious subject, you're the subject, the world is an object, this is the object, I'm different from the object. If you break this glass, I'm not broken, because the subject and the object are different. So here, what was asked was, is this body that I'm aware of, which I take myself to be who I am, is it an object to me, or is it a subject? That's the question. Am I aware of the body? Is it known to me? Is it at times not known to me? Yes. This was my experience. I didn't have to believe this. So therefore, on the same type of reasoning that the outer objects can't be me because the subject and the object can't be the same, everything that's known to me has to be an object. let me say one more thing about consciousness. We're all, without consciousness, there's nothing for us. If we had no consciousness, we would be like a rock. The world wouldn't be available to us. So consciousness is perhaps the most important central thing and seemingly the most mysterious of all things because it's so intangible, so subtle, so once we try to think about it, we get lost in riddles. But here, the analysis was consciousness has to be the subjective element in experience, and the content of consciousness, whatever appears in consciousness, is an object to it, including the body, the senses, and even the mind. All the mental phenomena are also objects of my consciousness. That meant that when there's happiness, happiness is an object to my consciousness. So when there's happiness, consciousness is not happy. When there's sadness, consciousness is not sad. When there's memories, consciousness is not memories. Whatever mental phenomena that appears, it's an object to consciousness. And if you pursue it just a little bit further, you'll see that the ego, this idea that I have about myself, I am Ira, I was born in Queens, I went to this school, this whole autobiography about myself, this I notion, I am fat, I am thin, I am fair, I am going, I am sitting, this I is also an object in consciousness. The I that I've taken myself to be, so identified with as this is the real I, all of a sudden gets thrown into the category of object. Then I'm the subject. Who's the subject? Who's the real subject in experience? I've never really introspected my experience and tried to determine what is known and who's the knower, what is experienced and who's the experiencer, what is object and who is the subject. When you do this business, you'll soon see that I am the subject, aware of the world, the body, the mind, the senses, and the ego, and therefore of a nature different from all of them. Is everybody with me? So far, it's fairly okay. Now, let's go one more radical step, if you're willing to do this. This teaching that I was studying pointed out a further fact, which is really quite amazing, which was I'm not only aware of this world and this body and these senses and the mind, but if you're willing to examine the totality of your own experience with no prejudice towards any one particular experience, then you're able to take the perspective that my waking state is an object of my experience. That my waking state begins, it continues for a period of time, and my waking ends. When does it end? As soon as my dream experience, my dream state appears. As soon as the dream appears, my waking experience has ceased. That's my experience. If anyone here has a different experience, they can talk to me later. But I think this is a universal fact of experience, that as soon as the dream comes, the waking is canceled. As soon as the waking appears, the dream ceases. That from the subjective point of view, my waking and dream are equally appearing and disappearing to me. Now, what does that mean? Instead of starting with the waking state, because there's a problem with that, let's start with the dream experience. Everybody knows their dream began at a particular time. We make it an event in the waking time series. And it ended when I woke up at 9 o'clock or whatever. So that state had a beginning and an end. And when that state appeared, my dream state, in that state, a dream world appeared to me. At that time, I took it as waking. It wasn't until I woke up that, oh, it's only a dream. But during the dream, we have states during which we take it as the waking state while we're dreaming. It's not until we wake up that we falsify it. So when the dream appears, there's the dream time, the dream space in which all the things are taking place. There's my dream friend, there's dream causality, and there's dream perception. I see a tiger over there. I tell my friend, hey, there's a tiger, let's run. He says, okay, and we go. And we're running, the tiger's coming, and then I wake up. That whole dream world, with the dream time and the dream space, the second the dream ended, what happened to that dream world? When the dream ends, did the dream world continue? Or is the dream world concomitant with my dream? Most people would grant that when the dream ended, the dream world ended. It had no independent existence. If you'll grant that the dream world is concomitant with my dream state, then you might be able to see the fact of experience that my waking world is concomitant with my waking state. And just like when the dream ends, the dream world that was appearing in that state is not existing anywhere. The waking world that appears in my waking state is concomitant with that state. Is anybody with me?
Not sure.
Okay. Come with me some more. So, the waking world comes with the waking state. Oh, let me just tell you two other things that are in these states. You see this guy here, Ira? He's in the waking state too. When the waking state appears, this waking Ira, the waking ego, is also a concomitant phenomena that appears in the waking state. As soon as the dream appears, there's a dream Ira. And I don't know if you've noticed in your experience, but I've noticed that the waking Ira and the dream Ira are not exactly identical. Waking Ira is somewhat introvert, shy, but I've noticed in my dreams I could be pretty brave and extrovert. So there seems to be two different egos appearing to me. And I'll say a further fact. The waking ego never made it into the dream. And the dream ego never woke up. They're stuck in the states in which they appeared. My question then is, who am I? Who's the witness of the waking and the dream? It can't be the waking ego. He's stuck in the waking state. And it can't be my dream ego. I am the witness of the appearance and disappearance, the subject to which both the states equally appear. And from the point of view of experience, there's absolutely no difference. They cancel each other equally. And the other important thing to recognize is that the witness of waking and the waking time and space and causality, and the witness of the dream and the dream time and the dream space and the dream is not in time or space. When I say I am the witness of both those states, then I'm not in time or space, because time and space is contained to the state. Dream time can't get out of dream space, the dream state. The waking time can never be independent of the waking state. But if you'll follow me just a little bit closer, has anyone had an experience where their waking state is not appearing to them, and their dream is not appearing? There's no waking and there's no dream. Where we say, I wasn't aware of anything. That I'm the one who knows when waking is appearing, and I'm the one who knows nothing is appearing. That same consciousness that exists in all the states, whether anything appears or disappears, is me. That me is not in time. What does that mean? It never gets born. It never gets sick. It never gets old. And it never dies. My true self is immortal, unchanging consciousness. Ever peaceful, ever the same, never affected. If I'm cut in the dream, I'm not cut. Everyone concedes that fact. If I'm cut in the waking, I'm cut. But the witness is not cut. The witness of waking and dream is exactly the same. From your own experience, you can validate the truth of this. I am timeless awareness. I am that. The whole Vedantic teaching is when they say, you are that. They're pointing to that. That witnessing consciousness in you is that. If a person can introvert their minds and recognize this fact of experience, they could nod their head and say, I am that. I am the absolute reality that's ever present. That witness, whether the waking's there, it has to be there. When the dream's there, it has to be there. And it has to be there to know that nothing was appearing. So there's never a time when I'm not present. This is called the non-duality presence, the eternal presence of myself. So when I heard this teaching, the whole idea that I had about psychedelics, that I got it and lost it and got it and lost it, and how can I get it and not lose it, all of a sudden everything was turned topsy-turvy in the sense that you don't get the witness. You don't lose the witness. What I was getting and losing was different experiences that was appearing in the witness. And this was the solution to my problem. I didn't have to get a new experience. It wasn't a question of getting some mystical state or mundane state. It was really that whatever appeared or disappeared, my nature, my true nature is the same. And I can validate that in my own experience. It wasn't because some ancient text told me it. It wasn't because somebody with a long beard told me it. It wasn't on the authority of anything except my own experience. Not only that, you see, I can have the experience of something and then later see I made a mistake. It was a false experience. It wasn't veridical. That there can be false experiences. If I'm walking in the dark and there's a rope there, I can see a snake. That's it's a real experience, but it gets sublated later when I put a flashlight and I say, oh, it's only a rope. That experience was a false experience. I thought there was a snake there. But the experience of the witness in you is not like that. And let me try to tell you why. Because whatever experience I have, if I doubt it, I have to be there to doubt the experience. The one thing that can't be doubted, because the doubt has to appear in that consciousness. I can doubt the rope or the snake or the world, or I can doubt the existence of anything. But in order to doubt, it has to be an object, the contents of consciousness. So the one thing I can't doubt is my own consciousness, in experience. That's the one indubitable datum that I have, and therefore I don't have to believe in it on the authority of any outside source. An indubitable fact of experience that I exist, and that I is not this puny ego in this waking state that's aware of an infinite universe. Now the perspective is the whole universe with this body, mind, and senses and ego is an object to me. I'm not in time. Time is in the state. Time is in the state, and even when the states don't appear, I'm timeless. In fact, how I was when nothing was appearing, we call it deep sleep, is how I am right now. When the waking state appears, my nature doesn't change. When the dream appears, my nature doesn't change. How I was then is how I am now. How was I then? Pure, awake, unattached, free from desire, free from fear. That's my eternal nature. That's your eternal nature. That's everybody's eternal nature if they're willing to introspect on their own experience. It worked for me. Seems like it's my experience. So much so now I'm about 25 years old. This is what I picked up. I studied with teachers. This is called Advaita Vedanta. What I just shared with you is Advaita Vedanta. It's a unique teaching in that nobody thinks that I'm the unchanging witness beyond time and space. There's one more thing, let me point out here how radical this gets. I'm the witness of waking and dream, and they're both appearing and disappearing to me. Dream, the duality that appears in dream, never really existed. The only thing that was really there during the dream was me. It was me that appeared as the dream time and the dream space. There was nothing else there but me, in truth. In the same way, if you see the waking state is exactly, from the point of view of the subject, the same, I'm the reality of waking. What I call waking is me. It has no existence apart from me. The object can't exist without the subject. So the reality of the object is the subject. But the reverse is not true. Even when the object goes, the subject is still there. Without a subject, no object. Without an object, subject is unaffected. I'm the only reality. I'm the one without a second. I'm the non-dual reality. That is my nature. There is only one reality without a second. In Sanskrit it's called ekam advityam. One without a second. And we can validate this teaching. We can realize this teaching based on our own experience. All that's required to intuit this truth about your own experience is the capacity of our ordinary external extrovert minds that's running after money, sex, power, fame, friends, security, whatever it is. Well, we're hardwired for our minds to go out. We want to find a mate. We want to find security, money. So the mind is out. And as long as the mind is out, which is the natural tendency of the human mind, this witnessing consciousness is so far away, so incomprehensible, that we can't even imagine it in a bad dream. But the mind does have the capacity to introvert. Hopefully while I was speaking for a little while, you tried to do it yourself. And when you did that, you had some idea of what I was talking about. Because I'm not talking about, I went to India and I went to a cave and I meditated for 20 years and I've had an experience that you guys don't know about. I'm a mystic. I know the truth. You guys, you live in East Hampton, you don't know crap. If you want to join my ashram, I'll teach you how to do this. It's going to cost you. This is nothing about any special thing that I have or did or anything. It's merely when you listen to this teaching, the natural tendency of the extrovert mind for a little while becomes introvert, and all of a sudden there's a tacit nod of the head that you may not have done unless that prompting to go in and examine your own experience was there. And I encourage anybody that's willing to want to know the truth of their experience to examine it dispassionately, especially this thought. Are the thoughts the mental phenomena? You see, even though I'm totally identified with this body, the identification is so thick that I can hardly even imagine that I'm not this, from the tip of the toe to the top of the head. So I feel that my body is conscious, because if you touch it, I feel it. It's a conscious body. I assume that if this thing is touched, it doesn't feel it because this is not conscious. My body is conscious. And so that's who I am. I'm a conscious body. But like I said, when you examine experience, you'll see that there's some ambiguity. Sometimes I say I am this body, and sometimes I say my body, as though it was a possession of mine. The other ambiguity becomes, if I were to amputate this finger and put it on the table right now, I would then want to say, well, that's, as long as it's attached, this is me. If you amputate it and put it there, then it's no longer me. But really, it's hard to distinguish this finger here and that finger there. Because the body is, of course, nothing but atoms and cells and molecules, and none of that could be conscious. So what is it in me that's the conscious thing? We may think it's the sense organs. It's the senses by which I know the mind, the body. So the senses are the knower. They're the subject in relation. I see the body. I smell the body. I can taste the body. I know if I didn't have senses, I wouldn't know there's a... So the subject, the conscious subject, must be the senses. But we can easily see that the senses also are something that are known to us. As soon as my mind goes somewhere else, even though my eye is on the thing, I'm not aware of it. I need my mind to function through the senses. So ultimately what we normally take is the mind is conscious. The mental phenomena are conscious. So this is the real crux of the matter. Is the mind conscious? Well, what do you mean by mind? What I mean by mind is every mental phenomena you can imagine, experience, or think of. That means memory, emotions, feelings, sensations, beliefs. Every thought, every mental phenomena, is that an object or are those the subject? Are the thoughts, do they know themselves? Or are they an object to some subject? This thought appears, then this thought appears, then this thought. While you're listening to this very talk, there's probably a stream of thoughts going through your head right now. What the hell is this guy talking? There's a thing, you're judging it, there's an inner dialogue that we all have. The question about those thoughts, are they also object or subject to you? I think if you introspect, you'll come to see that they're obviously objects. They're temporary. The thoughts don't know when they're gone. They don't know when they've stopped. They have to be established as gone, not by themselves, because if they're gone, they can't establish that they're gone. The changing thoughts are established by some unchanging principle. If you were changing with the thoughts, you wouldn't know they're changing. You are the unchanging consciousness in which the thoughts arise, abide, and settle. If you introspect, you'll see that that's the actual experience of it. If anyone here of Vipassana, did anyone ever hear of Vipassana meditation? This is a meditation where they sit, it's a Buddhist meditation, and without any judgments or without any presuppositions, you just sit quietly and you become aware of whatever arises. My knee hurts, a sensation. The feeling of the breath as it enters the nostrils. Whenever a thought arises, you don't get attached to any of this. These are all phenomena that arise in consciousness, abide in consciousness, and eventually they set in consciousness. That witness to which they arise, abide, and set is called the self. That thing in you to which they are arising, abiding, and ceasing. That's called the true self, the unchanging self, the ever-present self, the self that you can't think away. Suppose you say, I'm going to think it away. The very effort would have to be in that consciousness. If you negate every single thing, the negation takes place in consciousness, and when you're finished, how do you know you're finished? Because the consciousness is there in which you've negated everything, every objective thing. Is everybody with me? This is the spirituality of Vedanta. It's not theology. You can see I didn't appeal to any God yet. But if you look at that self from your own point of view, I am the only consciousness in which the whole universe appears. I am all-knowing. Without me, the universe can't even appear. I support the whole thing. I'm all-powerful. And there's no place where I go where that consciousness is not. I am all-pervasive. In a certain sense, that self in you has all the theological characteristics that are attributed to God by theists. You can see that in your own self. In relation to the world, I am God. It can't exist without me. I pervade the whole thing. The whole thing merges in me. So you can derive a type of theology from it, but it's not based on theology. So this has been my lecture for the last couple of years. I tried to share this with people, and if they thought, hey, this is my experience, they would feel, wow, thanks for sharing, Ira, appreciate it. Okay. Now let me tell you, where am I here? Oh my God, what time we start? 7? It's 8? 1 hour?
7:15.
We started at 7:15.
Okay. And how long am I going to go? About an hour and 15 minutes. Okay. Because I want to leave some time for questions and stuff, which I always say that and I never do it. Let me see if I can. So here's the most important part. In the last 2.5 years, I've been thinking about this claim of Vedanta that if you want to determine the truth, you have to examine experience. That facts are established by experience. You can reason on the facts, but the facts have to be established empirically. What that means is that I can't just make up some rational philosophy totally divorced from the facts of experience. And that no amount of reasoning can refute the facts of experience. Let me give you an example. If I have a candle here, and I put my finger in it, and I go, fire is hot. How do you know that? I put my finger in it. And then over here we have a wonderful logician, and she explains to me logically how fire is not hot. Fire is not hot. I'm going to have to say to that person, I appreciate your logic, but something must be wrong because my experience, your logic can't overtake my experience. That the final arbiter of what the facts are has to be experience, and reason should be, if you can explain to me through reason why my experience is like that, that's another thing. You can't contradict my experience. This type of thing appealed to me very much, and because Vedanta was based on experience, I felt quite confident in my convictions about it, and in my conviction to try to share it with other people, that it would also be their experience, and they would go like that, just like I did when I heard about it. Here's my latest thinking. If Vedanta is based on my experience, is there any place where I have the right to ask, what's the cause for experience? Does experience itself have an underlying basis? My experience of waking, dream, or sleep, my experience of that mental phenomena appear and disappear as objects in my consciousness. All of those facts of experience, do they have some type of underlying basis that's more fundamental than experience? This was the new ideas that came up. Let me tell you how it came up. Has anyone heard of a philosopher by the name of Sam Harris? How about Daniel Dennett? How about Christopher Hitchens? How about a famous evolutionary biologist by the name of Richard Dawkins? So, in exposing myself to these people's ideas, I came to appreciate a possible fact that even though my experience was exactly as I introspected it, and that my claim that anyone in this room, if they were willing to introspect their own experience, could come up with the same conclusions that I did, is there an underlying explanation for experience itself? Even though it doesn't change experience, could I explain the very basis of consciousness, of subjectivity, of experience more fundamentally than just starting? The starting point here was experience. But this was being questioned, that is there a cause for experience? Does science have something to tell us that Ramana Maharshi, that Nisargadatta, that the Buddha, that the Upanishadic rishis didn't know about, couldn't know about, and couldn't enter into even their thinking? And so let me just briefly mention three things in the last 150 years that has changed our whole understanding of life, who we are, how we got here. And those scientific facts, as understood, have tremendous philosophical implications. They're not just dry scientific facts. And I'll mention three. One is, I'll call it in general, astrophysics. What has astrophysics taught us that we didn't know before? When Shankaracharya and the Buddha and all of these ancient guys looked up in the sky, they had no way of knowing what we now know about our place in the universe. If you take a look of what science has portrayed for us, of billions of galaxies, amongst where one galaxy, the Milky Way, and in that galaxy, billions of stars, one star, very insignificant star in our galaxy, is a bunch of these little planets floating around, and we're sitting on this thing here, and that's our place in the universe. Not too significant. The universe wasn't made for us. It seems quite clear. We can't be the center of the universe. That's one thing that astrophysics tells us. The second thing that it tells us is something about the universe. Our known observable universe began 13.8 billion years ago, with good scientific evidence to believe that fact. The Buddha, Shankara, the ancient philosophers of India and in the West had no access to this understanding. Are there philosophical implications? I don't have time to talk about it, but everybody here who's involved in non-duality, something to think about. Number one, astrophysics. The second thing, 1859, Mr. Darwin publishes The Origin of the Species, and all of a sudden, the whole understanding of who we are on this planet is turned upside down. From a child of God to the evolution from a single-celled organism, and explains how we got here with no need for any divinity in the explanation. If we understand evolution, then all of the ideas in the East, such as reincarnation, that I got here because of what I did in a previous life, and that this life is the outcome of those activities, that explanation is no longer valid if we accept how we got here because my mother and father passed the genes, and now we understand without any ideas of past lives. The other thing that it implies is that we should give up the notion that the actions that I do in this life will produce some future life for me, because evolution has explained how I got here. When you didn't know that, then the story of how I took this life perhaps becomes somewhat plausible. But in the light of evolution, the theory of rebirth and future births have to get tossed out the window. I'll mention one other thing. Cognitive neuroscience. In the last 20 years, what we've learned about the brain and mental states is something that, unless you're in the field or you've taken the time to make yourself knowledgeable, ordinary people, we don't know about. But if you were to take the time, you would come to understand that we've made tremendous strides in what you see, my tradition of non-duality, the greatest philosopher was a person by the name Shankaracharya. Has anyone ever heard of Shankaracharya? A handful of people. 8th century. He said that consciousness could never be produced by matter. No matter how much you mix up matter and shake it up, matter can only produce more matter, and it could never produce consciousness. He couldn't conceive of it. But in fact, modern neuroscience is giving us ways to conceive of things that we thought were inconceivable. Just like Darwin, we looked at the world of complexity. It seemed so complex, there had to be a designer. Whenever I see a watch, I know there's a watchmaker. And when I look at this world, I know there must be some infinite designer that designed it. But Darwin gave us a way to see complexity in design without the need of a designer. And modern neuroscience is giving us ways to think about the origins of consciousness and mental phenomena in ways that, even though it seemed inconceivable before, we can now appreciate that this biological evolutionary thing we call the brain, somehow, not yet fully understood, but in principle, we can understand how the brain has created mental phenomena, experience. That experience that I'm a subject, aware of an object, how the brain is producing that experience, we're getting closer and closer to understanding. It's not a big mystery. And that will have explained, from a materialist point of view, our experience of subject and object, the very basis of Advaita Vedanta. In summary, if that is the case, astrophysics, evolutionary biology, and cognitive neuroscience tells us that our experience has an origin in the universe, and that we should not think that it could exist independent of that. When you look at it from the subjective point of view, I took you to the point where you're the only reality. The universe was negated. Duality was negated. But if you take it that my experience has an underpinning that without which I couldn't even have experience, introspection, or consciousness, then you have to say this: my experience, my consciousness, my subjectivity is dependent on a brain and a nervous system. And when that brain and nervous system is gone, that consciousness, experience, and subjectivity which it was producing is also God. That is the scientific image, the view of science, that if you adopt it, you must come to that conclusion. Does that negate the Vedantic teaching? Some people are saying yes. I'm saying that in no way does it negate it in this sense. If I examine phenomenologically my experience, I can understand that I'm the witness, the unchanging reality. In that perspective, not only does science, the brain, the nervous system, they're all appearances in consciousness. All of science is in the waking state. From my point of view of experience, I'm not in the waking state in which the brain and neuroscience and astrophysics, that's their realm. But from the point of view of experience, I am the timeless awareness. That never changes from the point of view of my experience. What if they chop off your head? What if they chop off your head in a dream? From the point of view of experience, waking and dream are the same. Of course, in the dream, science, dream science is valid. If I cut off your head, you're dead. In the waking state, waking science is valid. If I cut off your head, you're dead. But from the point of view of experience, you are unattached, timeless awareness, and that doesn't change. That nothing can negate that. You can't think it away from the subjective point of view. So how do these 2 points of view, can we say that they're both valid? Can you say that one's more valid, but nevertheless the other one is a true representation of my experience? Or can you say the experiential has to be taken as primary? At this point, I want to leave that question dangling for all of you, because in all honesty, it's now dangling for me. I always felt there was no conflict between science and Vedanta. That if science told me light travels at 186,000 miles a second, I wasn't going to look in the Bhagavad Gita to see if it was correct or any other thing. So, but that was not a problem for me, because I was able to put science within the empirical work of the waking state, and that waking for me is just like a dream. Just like when I took my first LSD trip, it's all a trip. The conviction from that experience was that it was a beginningless, endless trip that had no reality at all. Vedanta and that experience as a young boy taught the same, except there was a confusion about I got it and I lost it. You can see from the teaching of Vedanta, you never get it, you never lose it. When I walk out of here after this talk, that light that's lighting up this whole thing will remain. And when I'm on my deathbed, and the doctor says, you're going to die now, sir, with that consciousness that is lighting up that whole scene, from the subjective point of view, never changes. This is called the first person point of view. When I examine my experience from the first person, it's called the manifest image, subject and object. But in science, there's no subject and no object. There's just matter. And it's matter that evolved into a nervous system and brain that's making subject and object appear. I'll end it with that. Everybody could take the implications of what I've thrown out and run it through their own mill if they're interested, and come up, or even suspend judgment and think about it some more. I think I'll end it with that. We can take a few questions if anybody has any. Yes.
Could you speak more about astrophysics?
I'm not an astrophysicist, but let me tell you what I've tried to do. In the last 2.5 years, as a layperson, I've tried to educate myself in the latest cutting-edge astrophysics, physics in general. I would recommend, if you're interested, there's a couple of popularizers of cutting-edge physics. One would be a person by the name of Lawrence Krauss. He originally wrote a book called The Universe Out of Nothing, which is cutting-edge ideas about quantum physics and how out of nothing, which he calls the gravitational quantum gravity, in which there's no space, no time, no particles can come into existence and start the whole thing from what we call nothing. It's an interesting book. But there's another physicist out there, his name is Sean Carroll. If you go on YouTube, you'll be able to. And there are other guys like Steven Weinberg and Marvin Minsky, great minds that take these very difficult physics concepts, especially origins and cosmology in physics, and brings it down to our level. Even though you're not a professional physicist, the general ideas you can understand. And what I tried to do would just summarize two things. There's many more philosophical implications of astrophysics. I just wanted to point out the insignificance, because before astrophysics, of course we thought we were the center of the universe and that we had a special place here and there was a special significance to life and the whole thing. But once we saw that there were many planets going around, it wasn't everything rotating around us, that was the beginning with Galileo and Kepler. But then when we realized so many other things about that we're all moving at this tremendous speed and that the galaxies are all separating and eventually it'll end in a cold death, there'll be no life. There's nothing special about life. Astrophysics tells us that in the end it was just a moment in astrophysical time and we'll be gone and there'll be no life that could possibly survive in this universe. So there's no special teleology. We haven't come here because we have a special purpose. astrophysics tells us things like that. And there are popularizers, if you're interested, that, like I said, Krauss and Sean Carroll and Marvin Minsky. I'll throw out one other thing. There's a guy, his name is, I think, Kutzell, Kutsell. He has a thing on YouTube called Closer to Truth. And what this guy does, he runs around to Oxford, Cambridge, every philosopher, every theologian, every physicist, and interviews them. And so if you wanted to educate yourself, it's very simple. I mean, you can really, without being a physicist, you can understand a lot about it and come up and understand how it wasn't possible for people even 100 years ago to have a vision of the universe and how we understand it and how we're so sure the universe began, not 13.9 million, not 13 point, but exactly 13.8 million. And that we know within 1/1000th of a second after the Big Bang exactly what happened. There's a theory of inflation that explains, and we know from the background radiation that they're able to. Am I going too far on physics? I don't want to. This is not a physics class. These type of things, and you see, everybody studies evolution in school. Yes, we all know kind of what it is. But there are books. One book is called Darwin's Dangerous Idea. It's not just a simple little scientific thing. It changes the whole way we look at ourselves, our place on the planet, how we got here, what's the meaning of life, the evolution, and how hominoids evolved, and how from there Erectus and Neanderthal, and to understand this, and that until we got a prefrontal cortex that was sufficient for reasoning and autobiographical memory in which I could say, this happened to me in the past, this is what's happening now, I'll plan for these type of capacities, how the biological basis of the evolution, that the brain, over time, we understand how that happened now, gives us an insight into who we are and what's happening.
I have a question.
Paul.
So having heard this for the first time tonight and not integrated it and having had a chance to think about it, right? So, as a revolutionary new thought, and you're suggesting it could have that kind of an implication. Well, so my own personal experience of a revolutionary realization was when I realized that I no longer identified with my ego, saw it as an illusion, and now identify with that in me that doesn't change, right? So then how is this implication that you're dangling, what's the possibility of the revolution that could bring into thinking?
You see,
you get my drift.
Absolutely. You see, when people introspect, and people have been introspecting since Homo sapiens have been in existence, we have the capacity to introspect, all of us. But nobody ever introspected and came to the conclusion that I'm the witness, that's the only, I'm claiming, and it's a claim I throw out, that no other philosophy, Buddhism, Sufi, Christian, mystics, ever said that the self is the unchanging witness that's present, and that's the only reality. It's a unique teaching that shows up in the Upanishads. It must have been that those authors of those texts introspected their own experience and then uttered these things, that it can't be known by the mind, that which can't be known by the mind, but that by which the mind itself is said to be known. Know that to be the self, and that what you can see how they did that, and you can do it too.
Yes.
So that's the unique teaching of this thing. Nobody introspects like that. When we introspect, we think I'm the ego. And we leave it at that. These people took it one step further and said, even the ego is an object to me. That's the first time in any human thought. And they said that not only that, they said that witness was one, because it's not in time or space. It has no parts. It can't change. It's not something that has any qualities, because every quality appears in that. And they went on with all of this, and they said, that reality, you are that.
Okay.
If you realize that, that's called liberation.
Okay. How is the carrot that you were dangling at the end of the talk? What's the implication of that carrot?
What's the carrot?
Yeah, the materialism, the whole new.
Is that the carrot?
The rise of materialism that you're postulating gives rise to consciousness. So how does that notion, right, throw a monkey wrench into my previously revolutionary awareness that I'm not the ego, and which now serves as the organizing principle for my hopefully more sane life?
Right, perfect.
That's the question. Everybody understands the question?
Yes.
Before I answer it, I bet you can answer it just as good as I
The
can.
witness, is it not that the witness you're talking about is also witnessing the witness of Stephen Weinberg and Marvin Minsky and
That's
Sean
right.
Carroll and Warren?
They're all you. I'm Marvin Minsky.
That's it.
I am Carol.
That's-
I am the taste in grapes. I am the wetness in water.
Right.
I am the beloved who compares his lover to the full moon. I am everything. There's nothing apart from me. I am that one reality that pervades everything, that gives existence to everything, that lights up. I am the light of the universe. This is, you can verify this. It's so, but what Paul is asking, I think, is the carrot that I'm dangling. That wasn't the carrot. This to me is like onions. I wasn't, I'm very happy to remain as that. This was my way out. But I have to validate that there's another perspective. That this experience, this subjectivity, that when I introspect, I validate, is all the outcome and the product of a brain and nervous system.
Okay.
And from that point of view, with the destruction of the brain and the nervous system, all experience, all consciousness will come to an end. From the subjective point of view, nothing will come to an end because you're not in time.
Frank?
So there's 2 points of view.
Ira?
And you have,
Frank has
and by the way,
Carl has a question.
the point of view of experience is the only point of view that we're stuck in the Cartesian theater. The subject and the object, that I'm a knower, aware of something, the theater that's appearing to me. There's no way out of it unless you take the phenomenological perspective, that of science, where I examine you. You tell me your conscious experience, and I do fMRI imaging on your brain, and when you say, I'm aware of this, I see there's these neurons firing. And then I develop a theory of mental life based on neural activity. When you introspect, you never have any idea that you even have a brain. You could never know anything about the neural mechanisms that allow you to introspect. Nobody knew it until cognitive neuroscience is telling us these things. Shankara didn't know about it. The great meditators, because by meditating, what will you know about your brain? The only way I'm going to know something about your brain is if I take a cadaver, cut it up, see the thing, and get some idea about it, and make some scientific theory.
I
Yes.
just wanted to say that,
Sure.
there are scientists and scientists.
Okay.
And so there are many scientists, and I think we spoke about this before. There are scientists who you've mentioned who believe that the ground of all being is matter. And then there are another well-respected scientists who believe that the ground of all being is consciousness.
Could you
Just a
hold on
minute,
one second?
wait,
Could you
can I-
mention one offhand so I would know who you're talking
Well,
about?
I believe David Bohm certainly felt that the ground of all being
You
was
mean
consciousness.
the quantum
That's
physicist?
right, that's right. So, but let me,
Okay.
can I just finish? So it seems to me that what you're now introducing just says to me that evolution, as you're presenting it, has created a better brain, which now is a better instrument through which consciousness streams. And just, I'm just.
No, I wasn't saying that, but you're saying
Wait,
that.
okay, and, no, I'm saying that,
Yes.
you didn't say that,
Yes.
I'm saying. It seems to me that this is a possibility, just like what you're saying is a possibility.
That consciousness is something different, not produced by the brain, but streams through the
And the
brain.
brain has now become a better instrument through which consciousness can function.
So before the brains were around, consciousness was floating
Absolutely
around.
functioning, but the brain
Functioning
is,
where?
it just functions, it just is. You said that that background never changes.
No, what I'm saying is that if you say that consciousness functions through the brain, if you do believe that there was a time on this planet when there were no brains, if you study geology,
It's that way now.
and we realized there was there could
No,
be
no,
some
no.
no brains.
I said, let me clarify.
Please.
Consciousness it is whether there's an instrument for it or not. That's when consciousness is the ground of all being. However, if you're going through human evolution or biological evolution, we can say that this brain developed and now has developed to a place where it has the potential to introspect and has the potential to even see that this me that it has associated itself with is an illusion and that it is not the body-mind. So it is possible that all this scientific theory is pointing to a better instrument. It doesn't necessarily mean
Okay.
that we need the brain to produce consciousness. I'm just saying that's a possibility. I'm not a scientist,
Right.
and I
Okay.
also, I don't
Okay,
know.
so let's get some
Yeah.
questions now.
So let's hear, wait, let's hear an
No, no,
answer.
so, what's that?
I want to hear an answer to,
Was that a question? There are some scientists
It was a
who I say
statement.
are not scientists. These people that try to make quantum mechanics as the evidence that there's a consciousness independent of matter, and that without consciousness, matter can't even appear, as 95% of all quantum mechanics scientists now have rejected the what's called the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics. It's the fringe now. There's all sorts of philosophical and scientific problems with that point of view that if they were made explicit to you, many, I think you would shake a little bit with thinking that that idea is pretty weak, and the alternative has tremendous amount of evidential and scientific backing behind it. And after
Well,
examining
I would really
both
have to explore that
schools,
because I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true.
okay,
And there are some theorems which right now I can't remember, I'm blocking on.
okay.
And I think that we would really have to investigate that to see if that was absolutely the fact.
Well,
I
even
don't
if
know
there
that
was
it
a
is.
couple of scientists, or even if the majority of scientists were to say consciousness is basic, I feel that they don't understand the implications, philosophical implications of that claim. It would go against everything else we know in science. It's not possible, Evelyn, but we can talk about that.
But we can
Who
do
were you
that.
before you were born?
What's that?
Who were you before you were born?
Who was I before I was born?
Where were you before you were
I
born?
was existing, I don't want to be vulgar,
No, tell me.
in the genes of my father and mother.
So there was no existence prior to your
Conception.
Conception.
Yeah, the 23 genes and 23.
Okay. So,
Zygote, you know the
all
biology.
right. So then there was no Ira until the brain developed into its.
We don't get the idea of a self until we're about 2 years old. And we don't get the idea of other until we're about 4. And we don't have the idea that other people have minds and consciousness till 4 or 5.
So the
So
subject.
to think that even to have the idea that there's an absolute consciousness, takes a 5-year-old brain to have the rudiments by which we can even develop a philosophy of consciousness. Chipmunks don't have philosophies of consciousness, neither do chimps.
So the subjective experience has to be qualified as soon as my brain is developed until my brain dies. And that's it.
Yeah.
It's clear
But
now.
let me just say that that doesn't negate the subjective experience.
I think it does.
Yes.
I think it absolutely does.
Why is that?
because
You're
it's-
just explaining the experience.
Yeah.
No, you're explaining the experience based upon somebody else's theories, based filtered through their scientific filters, and that's just more theory. It's all scientific theory. Ju- Is it? How is it empirical?
I mean, if
What's
they're-
Science isn't
empirical?
Well, there's a working mind and then a psychological mind.
It's
Frank has
And
a
the working
question.
mind takes
I'm
care of the
sorry.
science. And the science never ends. The science is constantly being revived. But what you are doesn't end. It's always constant. So there's something a little bit different there, in my humble opinion, that with science, you look at the history of science, it's always changing.
Right.
It's accumulation of knowledge.
So
And
where's it
it'll
gonna
go
be?
on and on and on and on. But we remain the same.
Well, that's not. Apparently not.
My understanding of it.
Ira, I just want to ask.
Please.
Well, I mean, at the beginning of your talk, and I've heard you over the years, is now
Right,
I'm hearing
right.
something, and I'm saying, well, wait a second. If I would go and study and go on YouTube and study astrophysics and go all about these new scientists, and look at it and say, well, isn't this the waking state? Isn't this all still an illusion?
From the point of view that it's just the waking state, an object in my consciousness, it's absolutely the same as a dream.
So it's an illusion.
Illusory.
All these, all the science that we're
And the scientists, the Einsteins and the disbelievers and the debates have nothing to do with me. They're all in duality. I'm beyond duality.
That's what I wanted to
That's
clarify.
the experience.
Yes? If you're beyond duality, then there's no self.
In the sense that the word self only means a thing's true nature. That my true nature is not in duality.
You have no true nature then.
What's that?
There is no true nature.
Yeah, but what I'm
I mean,
saying...
as a individual at all.
That's correct. Vedanta says you're not the individual that appears in the waking or dream. You are that consciousness which has no qualities. So to call it a self only means that its true nature, in that sense, like the true nature of fire is heat, my true nature is eternal, ever free, ever awake, ever pure consciousness. That's my nature. Whether duality appears or disappears, whether in the form of my waking or dream, I'm unaffected by either. That's my experience. Nobody can cancel that. No amount of logic can refute that. However, that doesn't mean that my experience doesn't have a basis in material nature. And that's what we should all... I'm just throwing it out. This is my status as of now as a scholar of Vedanta. I think that question couldn't be answered by the great Shankaracharya. That question never... It was so obvious that was his experience once it was taught to him by his teacher, that he wrote about this in such a strong way that anyone who reads it can also adopt his experiential perspective and understand what he's talking about. The idea that all of that has an underpinning in biology was not available to him. No meditator could ever understand evolution. No Buddhist ever came up with the theory of evolution. No Hindu, no. This had to, only through science do we come to know these facts. Anyone else?
Carl? Nope.
Go ahead, Carl.
I'll try to be brief.
Okay.
First of all, for the astrophysics thing, I would recommend the Cosmos guy, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He has a very...
Neil deGrasse, okay.
He's got a great one.
He's another
Really
one.
catchy
Yeah.
title. It's called Astrophysics
Yeah.
for People in a Hurry. That's excellent.
Okay.
And the other thing I would like to say is, everybody here is trying to find the real truth. And I'm not certain we're capable of understanding the real truth. There's a lot of impossible to experience truth if you believe in the mathematics of science. It's totally impossible to understand that as you get down to the smaller, the super small, things get bigger. I mean, there's a lot of completely, totally counterintuitive realities when you go into 11-dimensional string theory. I mean, there's really no way of knowing, in my opinion.
No, but that doesn't negate...
No, what you said, I agree with. Everything about the experiencing yourself stuff, I agree with. But with the science thing, who knows?
We know a lot. When it gets down to the very cosmological beginnings, there's still debate amongst physicists.
Actually, as it turns out, we only know about 5% of what even exists in the universe.
I know, but those types of statements are
But that's what I'm
amongst
saying, that's
physicists.
why we don't know.
So let me just say one thing about that comment.
Well, we don't know.
We should not be
much, but What
dogmatic.
he said is all true.
Right? Because I felt that I was being dogmatic in my non-dual Vedanta, in feeling that nobody could ever contradict it because it was a fact of universal experience. But obviously, now all of a sudden I'm saying, yeah, but what is the basis of experience? Is that a valid question? Do we need to have a brain that evolved to even have experience? That question grabbed me. Does it invalidate this analysis of experience? I don't think so. Are there implications for this? I think there are. I'm working that out. I'm going to write something about it. But everyone else is free. The reason I think that I have something to offer in this discussion is that nobody analyzes experience in this way, that you are the eternal subject, unaffected by anything that appears or disappears. It's uniquely this Advaita Vedanta. No, yes.
Wait, I just want to say, but the experience that you're talking about, the experiences of an experiencer, which is all matter, that's all the ego. The experience, the experiencer, that's all ego.
Okay.
So when you talk about experience, to me it seems what you're talking about is coming through the brain, is of the brain, is ego, is of mind.
So the brain
And-
does create the ego.
Yes,
You grant that.
I do.
Okay,
I
we're
definitely
getting,
do.
okay, well, we gotta
That's right.
think about, okay, how does
That's
that
right.
happen?
That's
But it
right.
doesn't create consciousness.
I don't think so.
You don't think
But I don't know. I think we have to
so?
explore
Okay,
that.
so that's worth exploring.
Absolutely.
Let me just say this. What if hypothetically, you examined the question and you came to the conclusion that there's an overwhelming abundance of evidence that's coercive, that you feel, I have to believe that the brain not only creates the ego and mental states, but it creates consciousness. If you were to believe that,
Okay.
would then where would that leave you in this discussion of non-duality? Is there, the whole thing goes?
I think so.
It
I don't
collapses?
see- I
It
don't
collapses.
see how
Okay,
it
no,
do-
I
mean, I would
understand.
like to see how it doesn't
Yeah.
negate it all.
Yes.
But I don't see how it
Okay,
doesn't.
because
Because it
if
seems
we
to
take
me-
that view, then when the brain goes at death, within 2 weeks, our brain liquefies. It's the
Yeah.
first organ to go, it leaks out of your ear.
I'm going in the oven, I don't worry about it.
Before the 2 weeks,
Yeah.
okay. So that whatever thing that existed of Evelyn, of her memories, her hopes, her desires, that will go with the brain. The question is, does the brain create consciousness? So let's leave that open.
That's right.
And,
There's a
and
person with a question.
But consciousness, that's part of the brain. It's memory, right? It's created by memory.
Well,
all of
people
all
say
of
that's
the
a
thing-
function of
all of the things that the
consciousness.
senses experience, all of the 5 senses that experience, it's recorded by the brain.
that's correct. And
Everything
more
that
than
is.
memory, we have feelings and emotions, and we
But
have
they're recorded in memory.
planning and rationality. The brain is doing all of these functions. That all mental states can be reduced to neural activity. And once your brain goes, no memory, no thoughts, no hopes, no emotions.
No, I'm not debating that.
That's
I'm
clear.
just, yes, what I'm just saying is that when you talk about consciousness, the content of your consciousness is the content of all your thoughts.
That's correct.
That's right.
So, but thoughts are always based on something that happened. It's nothing new. And the only way that you can recognize an experience is that you have some knowledge of it, otherwise you wouldn't recognize it.
That's all granted. I'm just
So it's
saying
a-
that all of that mental activity of recognizing, granting, thinking is only because we have a brain that's evolved that gives us the capacity to do this.
And that's why it's totally unreliable, right?
And it's pretty unreliable. And let me say one other thing. We just came out of the trees recently. We evolved to find food on the Serengeti and to mate. Whether we have the capacity to really understand the final thing, maybe a little humility, but that doesn't mean we should be pessimistic. If we're seekers of truth, I think that we should pursue it to whatever capacity we have with this monkey brain that gave us reason and rationality, and we should examine the facts and see what at least the best evidence to now, with the idea that if new evidence should make its presence, I'm willing to change my beliefs. That would be the attitude of a seeker of truth.
Well, yeah.
And
Would you take an addendum to the hypothetical? So, if the brain creates consciousness, let's go with that thought. Is there an awareness that exists outside of consciousness that would be aware of consciousness, that would exist independently of brain and consciousness?
We have-
Please.
We have absolutely no evidence for that. It would only be a dream that we would like to be the case. Experience won't reveal that fact. Experience will only reveal the fact that I'm a subject. Shankaracharya starts his most famous work like this. Let me show off a little bit. Yushmat tasmat pratyaya gochara yoho vishaya vishaya noho tamaha prakashavat viruddha swabhava yoho. English translation. The concept of I and the concept of you, the subject and the object, are as different as light and darkness. It begins with this. Nevertheless, everybody naturally says, I am this. This is a fact that everybody, even though they're the subject, takes themselves to be the object. This is called ignorance in Vedanta. You've mixed up the subject with the objective experience. That's where he starts. And that's validated. You can go like this in your own, yes, I've mixed up the subject and the object. I'm the subject, I'm the subject of the states, I'm not in time. You can validate all of that, but none of that experience, we can never know that all of that has its underpinnings in a brain and a nervous system. It's something to chew on. Is there anyone else?
One last
I'm
question.
sorry. Yes.
Question?
Yeah, my main emphasis would be not so much on what the truth is, but on finding a connectivity to that awareness so that you can eliminate your own suffering and those around you. What the truth is really meaningless.
You see,
But being the interconnective awareness is really the grist.
the essential
Yeah,
part
the
of it.
essential, yeah.
Okay. So here's the thing. Let's say I'm not interested in truth. That's merely a philosophical debate. You can do what you want with that. What I want to see is in my own experience, am I in time or am I timeless? Am I mortal or I am immortal? These are relevant questions. And if I examine my experience, you say, I can come up with the verifiable fact that in my experience, I am unchanging awareness. And let's forget about the truth of whether that experience has an underpinning in matter, because what's the difference? That's my experience, and it's not a false experience because it can never be falsified. There's no experience that could ever falsify that. It's just that, is there a material underpinning for it, such as a brain and a nervous system, that allows me to have that experience? That would be the truth. But if we're not interested in the truth of it, but what's the experience that solves the problem of birth and death, old age and disease, then we have access to that readily available if we're willing to introvert our minds long enough to recognize this fact. Most people have no interest in it because it doesn't, what's the benefit, they say? Will it get me sex or money or I'm not interested. But for those who are interested in analyzing their own experience, they can discover something. Discover. It's not an imagination. It's a fact about experience. It's not religion. It's not metaphysics. It's not mysticism. It's beautiful. But it doesn't ask the fact, what's the material basis of it? That may be irrelevant. Everyone has to decide.
Right.
We'll end it at that.
Thank you, Ira.